recent years, when the musicians' health and wellness started to become a more significant subject among both the healthcare professionals and the musicians and the music educators, a lot of new literature as to how to prevent injuries or how to rehabilitate started to generate from both the music educator side, but mostly from the healthcare side, which is very good. Information is better. But I found with my work with injured musicians and students that the information that's coming from outside sources need to be translated into what we do and how we do it in a more healthy way, so that we can prevent injury, we can manage injury, and we can rehabilitate quickly from any small injury we might sustain. So since I have professional degrees in both sides of the equation, I have a unique perspective in this, and I wanted to share this with you. So today we're going to talk about musicians' work and injury prevention, and of course its relationship to healthy practice, injury first aid, the rehabilitation process, because rehabilitation is a process, it takes time. And I'm going to answer some frequently asked questions that I have encountered in my work with injured students and musicians. What to do if you think you're injured, and when to go to a healthcare professional, which healthcare professional to go. According to the cognitive scientists, the mastering of a musical instrument requires some of the most sophisticated skills, including fast and interlaced auditory, visual, and motor processing. In the last few decades, there have been a huge volume of research that has been being produced on cognitive sciences, and they tend to use musicians' brain because we have a specific training over the years, so they can then differentiate how we process information as compared to non-musicians. So the volume of that knowledge has come to a point where now we can actually apply some of those findings to our work, so that we can prevent injury, we can learn more efficiently, and we can quickly manage any small injury sustained. So that is the learning, that is the practice, what the cognitive scientists are thinking, and performances also of memorized compositions unfold via dynamic integrations of motor, perceptual, cognitive, and emotive operations. In talking about our work, most of the number of hours per day at the student level is spent with the practice rather than performance. So I wanted to get into why we practice. We practice to develop new gestural skills and refine or maintain acquired skills, both motor and musicianship. In this process, we accumulate new repertoire. We develop and maintain functional conditioning of tissues, which is called neuromuscular adaptation. We explore musical ideas, make interpretive decisions, and develop performance execution reliability and endurance. Now here's a fancy EEG of a drummer's brain during performance. As you can see, there are a variety of different networks that are active at the same time, because performance requires a co-activation of distinct multimodal network of highly developed perceptual motor pathways. So there's a lot of stuff going on in our brain when we perform. So when we practice, what we do is we provide multimodal information input into our brains. What is multimodal? Motor information, the movement. Proprioceptive and kinesthetic. Proprioceptive is the sense of where our limbs are. Kinesthetic is which way we're moving. Auditory, visual, cognitive, and emotive. When we're practicing, what we're actually doing is to give a stimulus to our brain. During the practice, this starts. And while we are repeating certain movements, this multimodal processing starts. The chemical learning, which I call this chemical learning, which happens in the brain, starts during the practice, but it continues after we finish the practice. As a matter of fact, after a point, repeating the same motions over and over again starts giving diminishing returns. Not only that, it can actually confuse or impede this process through information overflow. After the encoding, many times of encoding and stimulation, what happens is we create this hologram-like multimodal perceptual motor online imagery in our brain. And we're going to see how it's going to help us in performance. So what happens in our muscles when we're practicing? There are ultrastructural biochemical and metabolic changes in muscles and tendons when we expose them to exercise. The first thing is increased muscle metabolism and metabolic waste production. I'm sure everybody heard about the lactic acid. Increased blood shunting to working tissues, increased tissue temperature. This is very important. The blood is shunted to the working tissues. This is going to be very important in designing a good warm-up. Which muscles do we need to warm up? Also, the myofibrillar and cytoskeletal disruption in muscles. The little fibrils in your muscles get a little bit damaged. And then the tendons, there's increased collagen breakdown, increased viscosity. So the tenosynovial fluid in those tendon sheets, it becomes thick and sticky. This is as we are doing that one bout of practice. And then the tendons become dehydrated and become smaller. And we produce inflammatory molecules. So after repeated bouts of practice, what happens is our body realizes, okay, so we want to do a certain amount of exercise every day with our arms. So it starts a process to adapt the tissues so that it can withstand the biomechanical requirements of what we want to do. After we stop practicing, during the rest and recovery, the body clears metabolic waste. It replenishes nutrients and energy stores. And that ultrastructural damage works as a stimulus for remodeling. What happens is, first the inflammatory response clears the micro damage, structural and metabolic remodeling happens so that our musculoskeletal system adapts to the work we want to do every day. We end up with better contractile machinery, efficient neuromuscular junction, increased capillarity, efficient oxygen utilization, and increased endurance. Now, our muscles are ready. Our brain has that multimodal hologram that we encoded there. What happens during performance is that this hologram, I like to call it, carries us like a tugboat, almost a microsecond before it anticipates what we're going to be doing, and it optimizes our motor system so that we can actually do the performance. Since we move in microseconds when we're performing, there's usually not much time to get a feedback and do an error correction. However, certain new studies show that every once in a while we'll go through a checkpoint where what we're actually doing and what we encoded into our hologram to see if they're doing the same thing. So here's performance. He's going through the checkpoint. All right, so this is all fun and nice, but what are the take-home points? Practice provides stimulus for multimodal imagery That's your hologram. And it makes our muscles and tissues conditioned enough to withstand the forces that we put on them during practice and performance. Now, here's the big thing. Most of the processes of this chemical learning and almost all of the processes of musculoskeletal adaptation occurs during the rest periods between bouts of practice. In sports, they call this invisible training. Now, we talked about the musician's work, but each musician exists within a larger system. There's the musician, there's the instrument, there's an interface between the musician and their instrument determined by the repertoire. I call this musician-instrument repertoire complex. But this complex functions within a larger context. Now, within this larger context, there are certain factors that influence our work, which we need to be aware of because they can they can contribute to either prevention of injury or genesis of injury. Of course, the ergonomic factors. How is our instrument? Is it fitting our hands? Biomechanical factors. Is our position good? Are we moving with efficiency? The demands of the repertoire. Musculoskeletal factors. Are we fatigued? Do we have naturally tight muscles, naturally loose muscles? Psychosocial factors. Are we feeling down or happy? Cognitive factors. What is our learning style? Did we have to do a 5-hour homework? We pulled an all-nighter and the next day we're going to practice. Our brain is a little low on that cognition. Daily activity demands. We have to get up, brush our teeth. We use our muscles that we use for instrument in most of the daily activities. And school or work demands. These all affect what we do. I call this the ecology of musical performance. Now, take-home points again. Musicians' work happens within a system. Performance, instrument, and repertoire interact in complex and interdependent ways. And various factors can influence the work. And this needs to be considered in any prevention or rehabilitation approach. Now, healthy practice, in my opinion, means injury prevention. And it has a certain components: warm-up, cool-down, and efficient biomechanics, practice organization, rest, recovery, daily tissue capacity awareness, and how do we prepare towards the performance are important aspects of it. Now, let's look at these components again. Remember, our goal in practice is to develop our hologram so that it can take us through the performance, and also to develop enough tissue strength and agility and other musculoskeletal skills so that we can actually do what the hologram is anticipating us to do. Now, the components of healthy practice, in my opinion, are proper warm-up and cool-down. Very important. And we're going to get into a good warm-up design with you. Efficient biomechanics, of course, is important because if your biomechanics aren't efficient, you're going to be overworking, which opens the doors for injury. Effective practice organization, motor learning concepts, and how you actually can learn something quickly without needing to prepare a lot, and then repeat a lot, and sufficient body awareness. Of course, these all are dependent on the rest-practice ratio and recovery planning. Now I'm going to talk about different components of the healthy practice. Warm-up. Warm-up provides a bridge from daily activities to actual training. Most people think warm-up is to increase the body temperature, get the pump running. There is some truth to that, but we need to remember the blood is shunted to the muscles that work. So if I go ahead and run for a mile before I can go play the guitar, I'm not shunting any blood to the actual muscles that are going to be used in my practice. The primary physiological goal of warm-up is neural activation. So we give certain stimulus during warm-up that actually starts those networks, remember? Those networks to light up and optimizes the motor response to that, initiates the retrieval of what we stored there. Now the second is increased local blood flow so that the temperature is increased. So this is mostly what we use in instrumental study. Increased tissue temperature, which then causes increased tissue flexibility. And if you come up with a good warm-up design, and if you keep doing that every day before practice, it becomes a psychological anchor so that once you do that warm-up, you feel ready for successful practice or successful performance. It's very important, and athletes do that. They have their warm-up ritual, which once they find what works for them, they keep doing that every day so that before a performance, once they do that, they have this readiness. This is very important because I've seen a lot of people before a major recital or a competition, they keep repeating because they never feel ready. So a good warm-up actually anchors them so they don't have to keep repeating to feel ready. All right, so a good warm-up. Duration, 10-20 minutes for the initial warm-up of the day, and then you can do shorter warm-ups every time you give a break and come back to the instrument. In my opinion, warm-up for musicians need to have an off the instrument and on the instrument phases. Warm-up starts from the proximal, close to the midline, and it goes towards the distal, away from the midline. Very important. It starts with more general, simple movements and goes to more specific, instrument-specific movements. It starts with mid-range of motion, and as we are going into the warm-up more, it goes to full range of motion. Starts about 50% effort. When I say effort, I don't mean just the musculoskeletal effort, also the mental effort. And you can up it to 70% effort towards the end of your warm-up. Again, start with low coordinative demand movements and go to high coordinative demand movements. Now we prepared with some of my students a warm-up routine, and I'd like all of us to do that. So if you could please all get up. All right, so let's get a good standing posture. Let's go take a deep breath and drop your shoulders and your arms. Okay, now it's really hard to get into a good posture because there are a lot of joints involved. So I have a verbal cue which helps. So what I first think is long tummy, open chest, ears on my shoulders. So let's see. We're going to do the exercises as we see them together. I'm going to help you with some of the specifics. Okay, long tummy, open chest, ears on shoulders. All right, so remember it starts close to the midline, elbow circle. So you don't want to do big circles. Remember, it starts small and gentle. Now you can change the direction. It should be, the circle should be as big. Okay, this is for the deltoids, chicken wings. We use our deltoids a lot in changing position on instruments. There you go. Now, we're going to open the book, close the book. This works the shoulder rotators. which are also used, especially in certain instruments. All right, so now we're going to full arm. Remember, we're using the distal. Thumbs are up in this one. Okay, so pull the rope, thumbs are up. This is a neutral forearm position. Okay, now this is in pronation. Remember, pianists use their hands all in pronation. Guitarists, right hand pronation. So this works, movement in pronation. All right, moon ladder. Now, we also need to do supination. Hands are, palms are up. Guitarists use a lot of supination and string players on the left hand, so this warms up the supinators. There you go. Well, step to the step. Look how the students are doing. Step to the rhythm. Okay, this is a little bit complicated. See if you can imitate it. And then you push. Now change hands. Okay, cup to ear. Push that wall. Now we can do it with both hands. Cup to ear. Okay, push that wall. Cup to ear. These are proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation movements, which are actually used to light up the coordinative, basic coordinative movements. Okay, so the other hand. Hello, what's in my pocket? Now both hands, hello. What's in my pocket? Hello, what's in my pocket? Okay, there you go. Okay, now hand slalom. We're using both the flexors and the extensors of the wrist. Remember, we start at the shoulder. We're moving towards distal, or you can do it the way the trio does it, or like this. This is important because we use a lot of forearm muscles and they need to be warmed up. Okay, so now we can warm up the actual intrinsic muscles of the hand. This works. The lumbricals, which provide stability to the small joints. Or you can do it the way they do it. All right, now we're at the fingers. Itchy shoulder. All right, now we're working finger flexors and extensors. All right, you can come up with your own exercise ideas. Here's one. See if you can get that. I had to work on that. And here's a scoop, scoop. Finger pinchers. And grab that apple. You see the range of motion is higher in this one for the entire arm. Okay, after warm up, you always want to hydrate. Although instead of chugging, sipping is more recommended. All right, so thank you. Thank you for our stars. And this is just a sample warm-up that we designed. You can design your own off-instrument warm-up. And you can start building that psychological anchor. The many times you do every day before your initial practice, you create a warm-up and you do that, the more you will develop the psychological anchor, which will cue the peak performance zone when you are performing and or practicing. All right, now stretching. Stretching is also a very highly recommended thing to do, to warm up, to cool down. There are two types of stretching that we need to do. Dynamic stretch is everybody stretch like a baby, or you just woke up. Okay, so I'm not using any props. I'm basically using my muscles to stretch. Passive stretch is when I use a different extremity or a prop to passively stretch a tissue. Now, remember the warm-up we did, the hand slaloms? Okay, so that is a dynamic stretch of the forearm muscles. There are some problems with passive stretch. First, we need to remember that collagen, which is the connective tissue in all of the musculoskeletal system, is brittle in cooler tissue temperatures. So should we then stretch our tissues when they're cool before warm-up? I don't think so. Another thing is there's evidence that following passive stretch in athletes, there's decreased strength, decreased agility. Not only that, there's evidence that after passive stretch, there's more injury in performance. So dynamic stretch, use in warm-up and in between practice sessions. Passive stretch only at the very end of a cool-down session. And if you will not practice for more than 3 hours, I call that the end of the practice session. All right. Now on instrument warm-up, 10 to 15 minutes. Remember, when we pick up our instrument, we just want to go ahead and play, right? That's why we're all here. We're musicians. So you need to make sure you have a control about your enthusiasm about playing or practicing when you pick up the instrument. You have to remind yourself this is a warm-up. Begin with simple idiomatic, low load, low impact textures. Stay in moderato tempo, mezzo piano to mezzo forte level, dynamic level, short sustain. Increase the dynamic range, the velocity and pitch sustain gradually over that 15 minutes. And save the more complex stuff towards the end of it while everything is nice and working. The important thing in warm-up is that to stay within your biomechanically correct automatized skill level during warm-up. So you don't want to go ahead and do something you're just learning for warm-up. If you use what you already know, this will help you successfully retrieve already learned skilled movements. Then these movements will provide models during your practice when you're learning new movements. And since you are retrieving successful movements, warm-up will have the sense of success, which then is important in doing the psychological anchor. Always hydrate after warm-up. Now, cool down is another important thing. The objective is to facilitate recovery and remodeling, facilitate removal of metabolic waste products, decrease residual tension in muscles. When we do repetitive contraction in our muscles, when we stop, it takes a while for them to actually recover from that repetitive contraction. They're a little shorter and tense at the end of it. So a good cool down actually prepares these muscles to relax and return tissues to normal temperature. In order to apply a good cool down, we need to understand the rest and recovery cycles during exercise or practice. There's a micro rest. I'm sure your teachers have told you after you do work, you have to release that tension when the work is done. That is called micro unloading. That's the smallest rest. Mini rest is between practice sessions. Let's say 25 to 5 seems to be the most recommended duration of practice and rest. So you did 3 sessions. Those little rests between those sessions are going to be your mini rest. Mini rest is overnight. Sleep is very important in recovery and remodeling and chemical learning. And then macro rest, a few days away from physical practice. I know it's kind of very anxiety producing for musicians, but athletes actually do have downtime where they don't do any physical activity that's related to their sports for a few days. All right, so when to do and how to do cool down. Between closely spaced practice sessions, so 25 minutes of practice to 5 minutes rest, you can do gentle, slow, dynamic stretches. You can get into opposite posture. For example, pianists spend a lot of time in pronation. So when you're resting, turn into supination, right? Guitarists, supination in the left, pronation in the right, do the opposite. Assume neutral joint positions and rest. A lot of, I read a lot of recommendations. Oh, you know, it's okay to, between when you give a rest, you can record yourself and listen to yourself and, you know, see, and you can do mental practice. Mental practice is not resting. Mental practice is practice. So I recommend that if you're giving a rest, rest means rest. Rest your brain, rest your muscles. At the end of the practice day, or if you're going to give a break for more than 3 hours before next practice, you can do a 10-minute cool down off the instrument. You can do the 5 to 7 minutes of slower, gentle, and reverse. You start from distal, you go to proximal, and then you can do 2-3 minutes of passive stretches. But remember, it needs to be gentle. You shouldn't feel more than a tiny little bit of stretching in the tissues that you're stretching. Definitely no pain. Keep it for 5 seconds at the end, at the stretch. Okay, hydration and nutrition, very, very important. Of course, eat well and stay in optimal hydration. There's evidence that dehydration decreases endurance and performance. Hydrate during and between sessions, practice sessions, and it's recommended that you constantly sip water or some sports drink, which is hard to translate to us because we're not using our whole body, so we don't use that much sodium. We're not getting all sweaty after 25 minutes of practice. Now, sports nutrition, we realize that athletes need different nutritional strategies to keep their performance levels high, but it's very complex and needs a translation to musicians' work for the exact same reason that athletes usually use their whole body, big muscles most of the time, and their needs as compared to our needs are different. But here are some general ideas that we can use. Protein intake is shown to facilitate recovery after a hard workout session. So say you had a long workout, long practice session where you're learning new repertoire, you feel like you have to repeat it so that it sticks. Have a protein shake before you go to bed. Carbohydrate, it needs to be complex carbohydrate, so you're going to get into sugar high and then a crash within 30 minutes. It provides fuel for muscles during practice and performance. So it's recommended that you eat 1.5 to 2 hours before you're going to do a bulk of practice, your 3-4 hour practice, or before a performance, so that you don't get into issues of food staying in your stomach and having gastric issues. This also gives time for these nutrients to get into the blood so that your muscles can use them. Continue hydration. And nutritional ergogenic aids, the supplements, the performance enhancing supplements. There are a variety of them. You can go to any GNC store, you'll see big, buckets of muscle food, this and that. Effectiveness and safety of most of these have not been scientifically demonstrated. And remember, we're not using large muscles or entire body. So even if we want to start supplementation, first we need to ask a doctor. Second, we need to make sure we decrease the dosage just so that we don't overload our system with these supposedly ergogenic aids. Okay, so another component of healthy practice is biomechanical efficiency. At this level, at the conservatory level, biomechanical efficiency and refinement of technique go hand to hand. Posture in biomechanical efficiency is something that has been emphasized, mostly static posture, to how to stand up properly. For us, this is important, of course. You need to stabilize the beginnings of your arms so that you can do what you need to do with the ends of your arms. But the dynamic posture also is important in moving the body, aligning the body so that we do what we need to do. In piano, if you are moving from the bass side to the treble side, see, you don't want to move like this. You want to make sure you get help from your trunk. In guitar, if we're going to do a stretch, if we need more hand in front of the fretboard, we could either do this, or we could help with our trunk, lower our shoulder, and get under the guitar a little bit, so that's our body is aligning to help us do what we need to do. So that's important. Upper extremity positioning, of course we want to do mid-range. So everybody do a full range wrist flexion. Okay, full range actively. There you go. Now do a full range wrist extension. Okay. When we play, we want to stay right in the middle third of this, all right? And this applies to other joints too. But, of course, every once in a while, we are going to need to do something that will require us to go to the end of a particular joint, which is called end range, which is fine as long as you can recover from that and get back to your home position, which utilizes mostly the middle part of your range. Okay, what we spend most of our time here at the conservatory is to increase our motor quality, the quality of our movement. Hand-finger dexterity, eye-hand coordination, movement economy, execution consistency. Now, common biomechanical inefficiencies, there's motor quality. Some of them are easily detectable because you can see them because they're big. Unnecessary movement. If somebody's playing a guitar like this, you know that needs to be corrected. And inconsistency, high movement variability. Sometimes you can land, sometimes you can't. There's also the invisible, what I call, which is harder to detect for somebody if they're not musicians themselves, which is the high working muscle tension, high resting muscle tension, and high static muscle tension. Now, high working muscle tension in finger flexors. Finger flexors are here, okay? Usually we do this to do what? To produce a sound. Push down only as much as you need to elicit the sound you desire. Sustain the pressure on the instrument only as long as necessary. Forgotten finger, for example, is a common issue for string players and guitar players, because if you forget a finger on the low side of the string, you can still create the pitches you want on the high side of the string. But if the silent finger is still putting pressure on that string, you're actually working on higher tension. Targeting errors and lateral shift when, say, we want to go from here to there and we overshot, but we have ears, we are at an elite level, we know we're not going to land where we want. So what our body does is it grabs to shorten the lateral shift, which then increases tension. Okay, extensors. What do we do this movement for? Usually to stop a musical sound or to gain mechanical advantage for the next flexion. Lift only as much as you need, economy of movement. Use the elastic forces of the soft tissue. So everybody do this. Do you see how your finger tends to relax? Relax, really. It tends to come back to where it is. Okay, those are the elastic forces. And it's important to utilize these in movement, and we're going to get into that in direction changing. High resting muscle tension or residual tension within practice. If you didn't teach yourself how to quickly release when the work is done, you will have a residual tension, and then the reciprocal muscles will have to work against that. Or at rest, if you didn't give yourself enough time to recover from the prior practice, or if you have anxiety, anger, frustration, you will have higher resting muscle tension, which will mean your working muscle tension will be higher too, because the work needs to be done against this residual tension. All right, high static tension. When we try to do something overly difficult with our fingers, what happens is our body tries to fix the larger joints to decrease the kinematic chain to increase accuracy. All right, so what we have in guitar, the biggest thing, we have the right shoulder up, right? So a lot of pianists, when they're doing something that is a little too out of reach in terms of difficulty, here what happens is you start getting tense on the larger muscles. Also, if your instrument is too big, you're constantly using your abductors. And again, insufficient recovery from prior practice, very important. All right, there are certain parts of our movement that are inherently high intention. Point of movement reversal. So I do flexion, and then I'm going to do extension. After the flexion, I have to stop pushing down before I engage the extensor so that I can move my finger up. That's called micro unloading. It's a very important, small motor quality technique that we need to make sure that we develop. Otherwise, you get a lot of tension in playing, and tension causes injury. Finger alternations, cross fingerings, they usually require a lot of finger independence because humans are born to grab the branch so that they don't fall off the tree. So we are born to do this movement. We're not born to this, so it takes us a lot of time to develop this independence between our fingers. And if your independence hasn't developed, what happens is you're basically, again, working against high forces. High velocity finger alternation, velocity production requires higher resting and working tension. In order for you to be able to play fast, you have to keep a certain amount of tension there so that you can actually do faster. So it is a naturally high tension movement, which we need to be aware when we're practicing so that we can arrange our practice, repetition, and time. Pitch sustain. Okay, so if we're going to sustain a pitch on the violin, what we do, we need to sustain the pressure, sustain force, right? Same thing with the guitar. We pluck, right hand is fine, but then left hand needs to sustain. That is a high tension movement, which is important in designing practice. All right, so efficient learning is also important in preventing injury because when we learn efficiently, we don't have to repeat that much physically. When we don't have to repeat that much physically, then we can give our musculoskeletal tissues enough time to recover before the next practice. Now, most of the compulsive repetitive practice results, in my opinion, from the perception of a low reliability of execution, you know, the consistently inconsistent parts. Because the stuff that we can do, we know we can do. The stuff we can't do, we know to pick it apart and then analyze and figure out how to do it. But there's the small percentage of movement that sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't get it. And that causes low execution reliability, which then results in compulsive security practice, which then may end up us exceeding our tissue capacities, and before you know, you have injury. If you can find out an efficient way of practice, you will get better encoding, better retention, better retrieval, consistent execution. Then your perception of execution reliability will increase, and then you will decrease your dependence on repetitive security practice, and you will have a career longevity because you will not be injured as many times as you would otherwise. Now, there are some concepts that we need to remember. New motor capability and skill development takes time, so you have to trust in chemical learning and invisible training. In athletic literature, 3 weeks is emphasized as an optimum time period for the development of a new skilled movement in elite athletes. We usually are more impatient than that. We just want to sit and do it in a practice session or two. But remember, it takes 3 weeks. And it takes another 3 weeks, once you get it correctly, to be able to consistently execute that movement. When we practice, we need to understand the different skill components that they have their own neuromuscular adaptation times. Flexibility adapts day to day, strength week to week, speed month to month, work capacity year to year. When we practice, it's better to focus on the cumulative training effect of practice over time rather than short-time gains. Now, practice to rest ratio, what we learned that the adaptation happens during the rest. So how much practice to how much rest? Big question. First of all, it depends on the individual's recoverability and adaptability. Everybody is different. Also, it depends on the mental and musculoskeletal demands of the task. Remember, if it's high demand, it needs longer recovery time. New complex serial tasks, let's say you're learning a new repertoire that requires you not only to learn new movements, but you are picking up from your motor repertoire and then rearranging what you know. So that's a complex serial task. What is recommended is that you do twice the amount of practice and then dispersed over the day. So when you're learning something new and complex, practice it for 10 minutes, give at least 20 minutes, break to that practice. It doesn't mean you can't practice anything else, but don't keep practicing it more than a short amount of time. If you're practicing high velocity tasks, remember they are high tension, you need 4 times the rest between each burst of high velocity movement. High load, sudden load, sustained load, do shorter if you have a heavy practice session that you're playing something difficult that requires you to do a lot of high tension movements. Shorter your practice session. Oops. Shorter your practice session and alternate long and short. So do a long day, the next day do a short day. Remember, loud and fast, it's called power practice in sports. It takes up to 48 hours for tissue recovery. So if you spend a whole day on and off doing something really loud and fast practicing, give it a day of rest. Pick it up the next day. Also, remember the contextual factors, whether you just started working in the library, you know, whether you're feeling down, whether you have to use your head for something else, they all affect how we learn. Keep them in mind too. Okay, there are some mental strategies that can help you learn more efficiently so you don't have to physically repeat. Preferential memory, they have found that human beings remember the beginnings and the ends of stuff much better than the middles of stuff. So if you have a long passage, if you can divide it into meaningful little chunks or phrases, then what you're creating is new endings and new beginnings within that longer passage, which then will mean that you will remember more parts of that passage better. Elaborative rehearsal stimulates different types of memory, makes it more meaningful. So think about what you're feeling in your hand, and what the composition is about, and the harmony, the melodic line. So the more meaning you add to a passage, they found that the better you will remember later, because you'll retain better and you will retrieve better. Backwards by phrase or backwards by section. If you're always starting your practice from the beginning and going towards the end, by the time you practice the first 2/3 of a passage, you don't have much cognitive ability left for the remainder. This helps you focus on different areas of the piece before mental fatigue sets in. External focus of reference, this is very important. It's called movement non-awareness principle. It's used in athletes. Rather than thinking about movement, okay, I'm going to release and I'm going to move and then I'm going to flex, rather than thinking about the movement, what is recommended for better learning is you either think about a feeling in your hand or in your arm, or a sound outcome, that when you do it right. And so you plan your movement, but once you start your movement, you don't think about each movement. There is some evidence that people who think more about the movement rather than an external reference and then the outcome, develop focal dystonia more frequently. Okay, modeling. You know how to play your instrument. You have some automatized movements. They are fine. If you're learning a new passage, determine which parts of it you already know and which parts you need to create new motor chains, and model the feeling of the ones that you know on while you're creating new movements. Okay, remember multimodal. Use your imagery, mental practice. Visualization, remember, is found to be most effective if it is sandwiched between two actual physical executions. So if you're going to integrate visualization to your practice, make sure you play a small section once, then visualize, and then play it again, because that is found to increase efficiency best. All right, performance planning. I see a lot of students towards a recital or a competition. They keep playing again and again and again. They keep their practice schedule. Not only that, sometimes they increase the volume, the total duration of their practice. While athletes, on the other hand, do tapering. A tapering is progressive nonlinear reduction of training in an attempt to reduce physiological and psychological demands of daily training in order to optimize performance. All gains from training should have been achieved by the start of tapering stage. So you need to learn what you need to learn a week or two before that, your performance. For athletes, there are different days, but for musicians, you start tapering down the total amount that you practice 4 to 7 days before a major performance. You can decrease the total duration, but keep this number of sessions the same so that you maintain neural stimulation. Increase mental practice, of course, and don't just visualize the piece. Visualize being successful on stage. Visualize dressing. Visualize going on the stage. When the lights are off, the audience stops talking, and then there's this silence right before you have to walk onto stage. Visualize all that. Get ready. Rehearse. Mental rehearsal. All right. Another important thing in preventing injury is to be aware of our body. Our tissues have a daily capacity, after which we need to sleep and add more to that capacity. So let's see. I decided to put a pair of tight pants. Oops, I used some of my allowance. I decided to open a really heavy door. Oops, I used some more of my upper extremity allowance. I decided to go to the gym. Oh boy, I used a lot of my upper extremity allowance. Of course, I have to do Facebook or whatever the new generation of electronic. And all of a sudden, I don't have any more allowance, tissue capacity for that day, but I have to practice. That is when we get into a danger zone for injury because our muscles are fatigued. We use up what we have for activities that are not even practiced. So be careful about how much capacity you have left during the day and adjust your practice intensity and duration accordingly. Another thing is the daily skill execution capacity. So we know we have an ideal way of doing something in our head, playing a piece in our head, okay? But every day is different. Today is cold, tomorrow will be hotter, our instrument will be different. We might be feeling down, we might be feeling very happy, we might have had a lot of other things in our mind. So the important thing is to be able to find where your fingers are and play within your skill capacity. This is something done in sports practice, and it yields better learning because you learn to adapt. It's called varied practice. Basically, you do the same skill under varied conditions, and you'll learn to adapt to different conditions: fatigue, mental fatigue, musculoskeletal fatigue. So it's important that you develop this capacity too. Now, injury rehabilitation. How are we doing on time? I'm going to talk a little bit of injury rate? 130? 135, okay. So injury rehabilitation, let's say we did everything right. Does that mean we're not going to get injured at one point? Unfortunately, not according to the statistics. The 86% prevalence rate has been reported during a career. So 4 out of 5 musicians will sustain at least one injury that's going to affect their ability and function as a musician. So then we need to know what we need to do if we're injured and what the process is. During injury rehabilitation, the first thing, if we're injured, the first thing to do is to decrease inflammation, which is achieved by rest and injury first aid protocols, sometimes anti-inflammatories if your doctor prescribes that. Then we need to facilitate tissue healing. This is usually accompanied at some point after the acute part is gone by a prescribed therapy from a licensed PT and OT. And I recommend somebody with a certified hand therapy, CHT designation after their PT and OT credential. This goes hand in hand with gradual return to play. So if you injured yourself, you rested, and then you went to your therapy, your tissues are fine, and you pick up your instrument and you play it just like you've been playing, what will happen is you will get injured. So gradual return to play is very important, and it's going to be accompanied with temporary or permanent adaptations to our playing. Of course, you need to remember your healthy practice and performance strategies. And again, remember, you need to control the load on upper extremity that comes from those outside factors. Now, I have a handout for everybody. Let's say you feel like you're injured. You stop. Let's see. You stop, and then the pain went away, but you picked it up again 20 minutes later. You're doing something different, medium intensity. You're experiencing pain again. So you stop and you start your price protocol. All right, price comes before mice. Mice comes after price. So that's going to help you control the inflammation, and after you receive a certain degree of pain relief, then you can start moving within the pain-free or stable pain region. You don't want your pain to increase when you're starting to move. You can ask me any questions after you read the handout afterwards. All right, so gradual return to play. It has 3 phases. The most important thing in this gradual is the gradual, of course. Avoid premature excess activity. It has 3 phases. The first phase is the pre-repertoire. If you sustained a considerable injury that will require you basically not be able to play for more than 2-3 minutes without experiencing a lot of pain, you need to start the price mice and gradual return. You need to view this first part of the first phase as an on-the-instrument therapeutic exercise. It's not musical. It's basically keeping the condition, maintain whatever you have condition, and then gradually increase the conditioning. This is usually when you can play between 0 to 20 minutes, pain stable. Pain stable means before the practice, let's say you had 3 out of 10 level pain, 0 being no pain, 10 being excruciating pain. And then during this practice or after, if it goes to 4 out of 10, that's fine. But if it is going to increase more, then your pain isn't stable. That means you're doing too much. The second phase is the initial return to repertoire. This is about when you can play between 20 to 35 minutes. And then re-entry into standard repertoire. You need to be able to play 35 to 50 minutes without increasing pain or within the stable pain region before you can re-enter the repertoire. Now, in this pre-repertoire stage, begin with 2-3 minutes on the instrument activity per day, first 3-5 days. Then add 2-3 minutes at a time and stay there for 5 days. Here you do biomechanical ergonomic adjustments, daily workload adjustments. In the literature, usually there's this linear progress in how much you should practice. What we have seen in working with injured students is that there are actually phases where after a certain amount you can tolerate more increase, and after a certain amount of time you can tolerate more increase. So it's not a linear thing. In the initial return to repertoire, you can add more minutes, 3-5 minutes, but you still need to stay there for 5 days. Strategic repertoire selection, edit out work-intensive gestures. What are those? Extensions, long sustained notes, fast passages, loud dynamic levels, rapid position changes. You don't want that in this phase. So here's the simple repertoire progression for guitar. Start with thinly textured music, 2 lines, and then compact hand positions and open strings, increased use of bars and upper frets. So even just by looking at the black versus white ratio of the score, you can see a progression. All right, so let's say you can play 35 to 50 minutes per day. You're re-entering standard repertoire. Now you can actually add more mini minutes every week or for 5 days. You will be able to withstand that, the conditioning. But here's where most of the accidents happen again. People become over-enthusiastic. Finally, you can make music again, and decreased attention, practice time, intensity can cause a setback. Initial pieces should be of short length and within the tissue capabilities. So, what to do if you think you're injured? First of all, stop. Stop, very important. Wait for 20 minutes, try playing something that is medium intensity. If the pain comes back, stop and begin the price protocol. And then after 72 hours, 48 to 72 hours, you can move to MICE protocol. If the pain does not come back, analyze the demands of what you were practicing. So what was causing that pain, and see if you can find a solution so that it doesn't keep injuring. All right, so when do we need to go to a healthcare professional? If we have new pain or symptom that persists after we stop playing. If we have new pain or symptom that keeps coming back, it goes away and it keeps coming back. If we have chronic pain, that's a low-grade pain, but it's always there. If we have loss of dexterity, our fingers aren't moving the way we are used to. We feel like we're not able to control the fingers as well as we used to. You need to go see a healthcare professional. But who? I recommend that you go to a medical doctor with training in upper extremity disorders and interest in occupational health of musicians. Examples would be a hand surgeon, orthopedic surgeon that is interested in upper extremity, neurosurgeon, physiatrist, and neurologist. These doctors will usually have a team of therapists that work with them, and these therapists need to be OT or PT, and I recommend that if you're going to receive therapy, go find somebody who has a CHT, Certified Hand Therapist designation after their OT and PT, because in order to get CHT designation, you have to have more than 5,000 hours of supervised therapy experience. That it says hand, but it's actually from shoulder to hand. So a therapist with a CHT knows the upper extremity and the therapeutic modalities because they spend a lot of hours learning that. Remember, therapy is a prescribed treatment, not a table massage for relaxation. Don't go to therapy because it makes you feel good, makes you relax. Therapy is a prescription, it's a treatment, and it should be recommended by a physician.